Jeremy Lowe and Donna Ball co-present this talk. Jeremy Lowe is a coastal geomorphologist with ESA with 28 years of experience on the Pacific West Coast as well as in Europe. He has done a lot of work with developing this idea of the horizontal levee. Donna Ball is the Habitat Restoration Director at Save the Bay. So in addition to managing the science program at Save the Bay, she also is directing the community-based restoration program there. And they're going to be giving a talk on Baylands adaptation to sea level rise, horizontal levee, green infrastructure, and soft bird speed.
Well, thank you. And John has already told us about the future for the salt marshes, and Mike has told us the opportunities that we have on the transition zone. So Donna and I are going to talk about a pilot project that we're performing in San Francisco Bay. $2 million from the Department of Water Resources is going into a place that's going to be constructed over the next year or so, looking at how we can change our shorelines. It's not restoration, it's new areas of transition that we're creating. And why are we creating them? Well, because of sea level rise, and a great personal risk and no graphs involved. I'm going to show you sea level rise over the next 100 years. This is in today, this is in 50 years' time, up to your knee. 2100, it's up to your chest. Luckily I was prepared, I was in my chest waders. Unfortunately, it carries on going. We have to think about a shoreline that's going to continue into the future. And we're doing all this in an urban estuary. This is the South Bay salt ponds. You can clearly see the marshes and the salt ponds compared to the urban areas. We're going to have to manage these new systems, these new the ecological restorations within a working estuary. How do we do that? How do we incorporate not only the ecological values, but also the other things we need to maintain, the water quality, the flood risk management, the aesthetics, the recreational values. This is all a bit of a conundrum. So we're working on projects thinking about these different aspects. Because one of the things that we have done, we've used the Baylands not just for the salt marshes, we've used them for our own purposes. This map shows a large wastewater pipeline that goes under the marshes on the East Bay. It takes about 70 million gallons a day around the bay, puts it out to a deep outfall. That was fresh water originally before we turned up, which used to go into the back of our marshes to create the brackish marshes and uplands that Mike talked about. Well, we put that into pipes. We put that all our stormwater into stormwater channels. We've segregated our systems. So we're thinking about how can we put things back? How can we make a more resilient shoreline to sea level rise? But also, how can we enhance the marshes? How can we provide more diversity? How can we make more of the ecosystem services that these wetlands can provide? What we could do, and a lot of people talk about it with sea level rise, is move landward. We could take down the outside levee, we could move it inland, and that would give us more space. We could recreate marshes in front of it. In fact, that's what we've done with a lot of our restorations around the bay over the last 40 years or so. We've done exactly that. Unfortunately, not only is the marsh coming this way, we've also built behind the levee, we built right up to it with houses, with industry, with cities. So we don't have that much room in which we can make changes. How would we fit in? We can't realign all the way to upland areas. We can't create those transition zones that Mike was talking about. So what we've been focusing on with a large number of people within the bay is thinking about what can we do at the back of the marshes to maybe create some slopes, some above the tidal levels, which could then form transitional areas. And this is an example of what we've been thinking about. This is the type of thing that we were referring to as the horizontal levee sort of concept. Is on the left-hand side we have our mudflats, we have our salt marshes. We're very familiar with those. We do lots of transition. On the far right-hand side, we have our levee, a traditional FEMA levee. It'll get you the flood insurance. But between that, we've created an upland area. We've created a slope about 1 in 50, 1 in 30, which is much shallower than we normally have against levees. And along that's where we would like to put our upland areas which we're missing around the bay. So it immediately provide some benefits of providing a diversity of different habitats to the marshes, provide high tide refugia to the marsh species. It provides flood risk management benefits because it would reduce the wave energy that hits the levee, provide some protection to that levee. It provides an area in which the marsh can transgress into. If the marsh can't keep up, it's headed just above water, as John was talking about. If it starts to sink, then there's opportunities there to create new marsh further inland as it transgresses. And then we're thinking about this, that when we do these types of slopes, and we have a number of these around the bay, they don't tend to work very well. They tend to get covered in pepperweed. They tend to get, and I'm a gemologist, so I don't know all the proper words. Anyway, they tend to get weedy, that's what I get told. And what they're missing is a salinity gradient. They're missing the hydrology. Just building the structure is not sufficient. We have to build all the right conditions. And one of the people who have water on the bay are the wastewater people. So part of this work is thinking about how can we reintroduce some of that treated wastewater effluent into the backs of marshes, providing some seepage, but providing some polishing of that water as well. A multi-objective project which is trying to look for multiple benefits, but also then has multiple resources associated, not just money, but with water, with sediment, and with space. These are very much in the thinking stages. And it's a pilot project, and I hope that not just this project, but there are lots of other good ideas out there which need pilot projects as well. Because what we're doing is we're focusing our pilot project on the bit of this cross-section which we don't understand so well, which is the upland area, and passing water through it. And so our focus is entirely on this, the red box. And it's doing three things. We're trying to understand the project. And there's lots of people from different universities, from the University of Stanford, from Berkeley, looking at these areas. They're looking at, also we have the SFEI, San Francisco Estuary Institute, looking at the landscape context for this. We have a large number of different scientists and engineers thinking about how this could all fit together. We need to refine the design, but we also need to think about how this fits into the regulatory environment as well. Because there's no point in coming up with these great ideas and then not being able to use them and not being able to understand how they fit into the grand scheme within the estuary. So as part of this is also a regulatory dialogue going on with the Water Board, with the resource agencies. So where are we doing it? This is Oroloma Sanitary District, not the sexiest place in the whole bay. However, it is a very good place to try out these ideas because it does have a lot of treated wastewater effluent. It does have space directly behind it. So this is a bit odd that we're developing a marsh concept which is actually separate from the bay completely, which is not even facing the right direction. But the advantage is it's a closed system. So we can use it as a laboratory experiment. It's 480 feet of a slope. This is the slope we have here. It's 480 feet of that slope, which we can try experiments on, which we can try to understand how the water will flow through the slope, how the vegetation will grow on that slope, and what the benefits in terms of water quality polishing are. Subsequent versions of this will be connected to marshes, and we'll start to learn those interactions. But this is our first stepping off point. And Donna is going to explain to us the plant side of things, because we thought that would be the most interesting thing to look at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon.
No pressure. So I'm just going to be talking today about just this portion on the front of the slope. There's a wet weather treatment part that's a freshwater wetland behind it, but I'm also going to be talking about the ecotone slope that Mike and others have been talking about today. So what's happening on this slope is that Peter Bay and project proponents are attempting to mimic some of those transition zones that you heard Mike talk about by trying to recreate areas on this slope that are similar to areas around the bay. And so there's Peter Bay, who knows the bay really well, has gone out and found some of these sites around the bay, and we're going to try to mimic those on the slope itself. And so, as I said, I'm not going to talk about these so much as I am the native wet meadow and the riparian scrub. So this is a plan view design of the slope. So it's that same green slope that you were looking at in the other slide. And you can see that there's going to, if you look at the green, there's a lot of wet meadow types that will be planted across the slope with different types of soils on those. And then in addition, the brown is our riparian habitat types, so trying to recreate some of that riparian scrub that could be found naturally in our systems. And then there are areas with, I think Mike covered this too, vegetation areas that are depressions or swales that you might find in little hollowed out areas on the slope. So water will be moved through the system and monitored through a series of French drains and with piezometers, but I'm not really going to talk about the hydrology. We can get Jeremy to come back up if you have questions about that. So just what you need, the takeaway is that there's different types of cells, different habitat types. And then this isn't a great diagram, but it just gives you an idea of the cross-section, looking from the top of the slope down, trying to recreate some of these areas that Mike had pointed out, some riparian areas that transition down to the edge of the tidal marsh plain. And again, remember that this is a prototype, so we're just trying to work some of these features in. Here's the swale that I mentioned. So areas around the bay, historically, there were a lot of really wet meadow grasslands, particularly in the South Bay. And a lot of these had like depressions on those slopes where water would accumulate. So some of those are built into this as well. So Jeremy asked me to come because I have some plant names to share. So riparian scrub habitat, as it's defined here, will include some of these species. Some willows, some blackberry, rose, dogwood, elderberry, and with an understory of sedges and rushes in some areas. So trying to recreate some of that picture, like you saw that first picture that Mike had of China Camp, some of those areas. And then wet meadows and pooled areas, rushes and sedges, and then some around the depressions will be similar to the historic habitat types that we would see in transition zones around the bay. So more of the upland type species, sedges, goldenrod, rush, aster, mugwort, a lot of these, and creeping wild rye in particular. A lot of the South Bay in what used to be just like acres and acres, maybe half a mile of creeping wild rye around the fringe edge of the bay, and those are lost. So we're trying to experiment with trying to grow and propagate and create these areas around the bay. So where are we going to do this? Jeremy showed you a view of the site. This is what the site looks like right now. It won't look like this later. It's all going to be graded and constructed. And that construction is starting this year. So this is a really fast-paced project. It only took them a year or two to get it all permitted, and now we're in the phase of actually implementing it. This is the Orloma Sanitary District. They have all their facility infrastructure around it, and this is where we're going to grow the plants. So Save the Bay has the capacity to grow about 45,000 plants a year, but this project alone needs 70,000. So we're going to be doing 45,000 plus 70,000. So we're going to be growing most of the plants for this off-site on the project site, and it's only maybe not even a half a mile over to here. So we'll be able to quickly move the plants from one area to the other on the site. And this is hot off the press. Our staff built 17 raised beds on site 2 days ago, so it's happening now. We typically grow all our plants in containers, and we use volunteers. But we're going to be experimenting on this project with using raised beds. We do some stuff on site, not in raised beds, but for this project we're going to be growing most of the sedges and rushes in the deeper raised beds, but we're also experimenting with more shallow beds so that we can grow some of the annuals that we use for cover crops, and trying to experiment with different types of methods of growing. So this is a prototype. There's hope that we'll be able to use this to inform other projects around the bay over time. So we want to figure out some cost-effective ways to grow large numbers of plants, because this is a small, relatively small project with 70,000 plants. So you can imagine if it's scaled up to 5 acres, how many plants. Most nursery operations are not going to be able to handle that. So we're trying to inform that process as well. Save the Bay has over 60,000 members, and of those we can usually drag about 5,000 a year out to come out and help us plant. So we're hoping that we can use our volunteer base to help implement some of this project, and that serves a dual-fold purpose. They'll come out and help implement the work, but it also will inform the public about the need for this type of habitat and the work that's going on this project. Our staff can put in about 1,500 plants a day in about 5 hours, but we need 70,000 in this fall, in October, in the ground. So, a really cool thing about this project, Jeremy mentioned trying to come up with ecological solutions that will reconnect the bay and serve the need for function. So this project is just a prototype for this horizontal levee concept, for just the levee, but there's a lot of other options that can be looked at, and Orloma Sanitary District is exploring these right now through a series of work group meetings. But we could have seepage slopes for this, or behind those we could have swales, or maybe there's areas along the edge of the shoreline where it just fits better to have beaches, or maybe we have fluvial inputs where there's areas we could recreate deltas. And so these are some of the ideas on the table. It's important that we start considering a whole range of solutions and not just one or two. Mike mentioned the Baylands ecosystem habitat goals and update. The update that will be coming out later this year has a whole series of recommendations about how to treat transition zones and how to increase the resilience around the bay. And so this project is really great in that it really closely aligns with a lot of those recommendations. We're trying to get something implemented really quickly, and so a really compressed timeline so that we can get information. And it is a pilot study, and that's one of the big recommendations coming out of that report, is people need to start doing things that are kind of out of the box, unusual, and start learning from those so that we can implement down the line. Multi-objective and multi-habitat. We didn't go into a lot of the other features of this project, you know, wastewater treatment and some of the nutrient removal aspects of the project, but this has multiple benefits, not just the creation of a slope. And then all of this is hoping that we can come up with methods to increase the resilience of the Baylands and restore some of the functions that have been lost, while still meeting the needs that we have for infrastructure. So Jeremy and I both worked on this, but you saw a number of slides in here of Peter Bay, and Peter Bay is the main contributor for the biological aspects of the plant community and some of the planning that's gone into the biology. So thanks.
If there's questions, you have to come back.